So, French President Emmanuel Macron has said that the Ukrainians shouldn't embarrass Russia. And my only question about that is, what's the matter with him? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So as many of my faithful viewers are aware, I've made a big deal out of the war in Ukraine. For the very fact that, number one, I believe that it is a battle of democracy against autocracy, and I'm always on democracy's side, I gotta tell you. The other side is that the MAGA crowd have been surprisingly supportive of Russia, really ever since Donald Trump first made it clear that pretty much he loved Vladimir Putin and seemed to attack everyone, as a commentator pointed out, except for Vladimir Putin and white supremacists. So obviously there's something going on there. Also, for all the noise that the MAGA crowd have made about the investigations into Donald Trump and how could they investigate him about his connections to Russia and why weren't they investigating the connection of the Hillary Clinton campaign to Russia, well, you don't have to look very far to see that there's a connection there. I mean, just listen to what the guy says. At any rate, it appears that there is actually some good news coming out of Ukraine. Let's check out the map here, and of course, as always, I'll post links to it in the description below. But according to the latest map, the interesting thing has been what's been going on in Severodonetsk. And Severodonetsk, as you know, is this city in the very far eastern part of Ukraine. It has been surrounded for some time now on three sides by the Russian invasion. And the amazing thing, frankly, is how long the Ukrainians have been able to hold off, despite really a punishing attack by the Russians, where they've been continually bombarding this, pretty much totally destroying the city, and kind of in keeping with the tactics that the Russians have been using throughout this war. Nevertheless, part of the reason that Severodonetsk is important is because of the fact that it is basically the last major city left that has not been occupied by the Russians in one of the two oblasts, which is essentially a state in the Donbass region, this eastern region of Ukraine, which has been essentially engaged in a war between the Ukrainian government and Russian sympathetic separatists for some time now, really dating back to 2014, when Russia first intervened and occupied and ultimately annexed the Crimea. The Crimean Peninsula is down the south here. So Severodonetsk in many ways is kind of symbolic, because if the Russians take it, then they can claim that they've got total control of one of the two major states in the Donbass region, which in Vladimir Putin's continually shrinking war against Ukraine has been basically his last claim to what he's trying to accomplish there, where once his goal was regime change in Ukraine and taking over all of Ukraine and bringing Ukraine back under the Russian umbrella, and taking the entire coast, the entire southern coast of Ukraine. Now, pretty much his war goals have been reduced to controlling the Donbass, which already was largely already controlled by Russian separatists. So although in the global scheme of things, Severodonetsk is a relatively small city, certainly when compared to other cities such as either Kyiv or Kharkiv, both of which have been defended successfully by the Ukrainians and where the Russians have been pushed back, Severodonetsk would basically be a propaganda victory for the Russians. Now, what's interesting about it, though, is there's this river here. This is the, I believe, the Donetsk River. And on the other side of the Donetsk River is this large city, Lysychansk. Lysychansk is also in the Donbass, but the interesting thing about Lysychansk is it's actually on high ground here, whereas Severodonetsk is not on high ground. Being on high ground is valuable, obviously, even in this day and age, in terms of the ability to essentially launch artillery bursts into the enemy territory. Being on the high ground is still helpful, and it makes it harder for the enemy then to essentially launch artillery onto you. So as it stands now, much of the artillery that the Ukrainians have been establishing in this area has actually been in Lysychansk, which is on the other side of the river. And as the Russians have experienced a number of occasions when they've tried to cross a river, it's pretty hard to do. So Lysychansk is actually a much more defensible position than Severodonetsk, which is on the Russian side of the river and is in low ground. That being said, the Ukrainians have taken the position that they're going to fight the Russians for every inch of territory, as they did in Mariupol down in the south. And so they've been engaging that in Severodonetsk, although it appears that they have been evacuating a lot of civilians and even some of their forces in the face of a Russian invasion, which probably they thought at least they're going to have a hard time stopping. Now, the one advantage that they have in Severodonetsk is, as in Mariupol, there's a big factory just south of the city, and it includes things like tunnels and very sturdy bomb-proof buildings. So that was really the area that the Ukrainian forces were falling back into as of June 1st. And the predictions were, as you can see from this map here, that the Russians were going to be able to take Severodonetsk, and perhaps the Ukrainians would be able to defend the factory and cause trouble for the Russians, much as they did in Mariupol. But that really the bulk of the forces would retreat across the river back to Lysychansk. That was the expectation as of June 1st, when it appeared that the Russians were on the verge of taking the city. However, let's look at progress since then. Check this out. So as we go forward in days, oh my gosh. All of a sudden, the Russians are being pushed back by a Ukrainian counteroffensive. And you can see over here where there's territory that the Ukrainians now have total control over, and the rest of the city basically is an area that they've been able to push the Russians out of, but that are still contested areas now. So much for the powerful Russian military making great gains in the Donbass and on the verge of taking Severodonetsk. Well, this success by the Ukrainians prompted French President Emmanuel Macron to say that the Ukrainians should not embarrass the Russians. An interesting comment indeed, because the Russians have basically come uninvited onto Ukrainian territory and are randomly killing Ukrainian civilians left and right. Seems like right about now, embarrassment should be the least concern of Vladimir Putin. Now, that being said, I am a little bit of an admirer of Emmanuel Macron for the most part, especially given the fact that he was able to push back a right-wing challenge in the last election. And I'm basically for anybody who's able to push back on the MAGA Trumpist right-wingers, much as Emmanuel Macron did in his last election. Macron also, to his credit, is really a supporter of a unified Europe. And whereas we saw, for example, with Brexit, that there is an increasing movement towards nationalism and reacting against immigrants, these are things that Macron has really pushed back against. So in that regard, I actually am kind of a fan of his. But Macron, for his part, has kind of kept France a little bit separate from the American-led opposition to the Russian invasion, which has supplied armaments and equipment and money and other forms of support to the Ukrainians. Although France has supported this effort, it hasn't been as involved as, say, for example, Germany or Poland or Finland, for example. Instead, Macron has tried to kind of position himself as kind of an honest broker who's there to essentially mediate and perform shuttle diplomacy between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And that way, he's kind of taken a position much like the Prime Minister of Israel. The theory, then, that Macron is basing his argument on is the idea that the Russians need to be given some kind of face-saving way to exit this war. That they need to have something where Vladimir Putin can claim, hey, we had a victory, and then withdraw in good order. Now, that's not a completely irrational position, actually. And it's a position that, at the beginning of the war, I actually supported. I thought that there was some basis to basically say, hey, Russians, okay, back off, you got something, get out of here now. But as the war has ground on, and as the Russians have shown themselves to be completely unreliable as either bargaining partners or, for that matter, as respecters of international law, I think that view is really wrong-headed at this point. if the Ukrainians were to give the Russians any basis to say that they won, it will only really encourage Vladimir Putin to continue to cause problems for the Ukrainians and maybe even to look at other places where he's able to extend his influence and cause trouble. I mean, one place where he definitely could make such an effort is in Moldova, a country located on the western part of Ukraine, where there is, on its eastern edge, like in Ukraine, a bit of a pro-Russian rebellion. And in fact, Russia has located forces there as part of their effort to push east and cut off the Ukrainians' access to the Black Sea over here. You can see over here is the Crimean Peninsula, and then over here is Odessa, which is the Ukrainians' largest city on the Black Sea and is a major port for them. So you can see over here, you've got to the west Moldova, where the Russians could cause trouble if, again, we kind of give Vladimir Putin some face-saving measure. Other countries that should be seriously worried about Russian incursion, if Putin is given some face-saving exit strategy, include NATO members, Poland and Turkey, as well as potential NATO member, Finland. And that doesn't even take into account potential Russian interference in Central Asia or the Middle East. So the bottom line at this point is that Macron is wrong. Basically, Putin needs to be embarrassed. He needs to be put into a situation where he feels he cannot engage in this kind of military action in the future. And this kind of humbling of him, frankly, could deeply undermine his administration, potentially even leading to his replacement, which of course would be a wonderful thing. But I think that is too much to hope for. The biggest focus we should have on right now is making sure that the Ukrainians are successful enough to push the Russians out of their country far enough that Vladimir Putin and his administration are essentially humbled to the point that they don't engage in this kind of a military action ever again. Well, if you want to check out another video that I made about the Ukraine war, why don't you check out this video over here that I made a little while ago. I have been paying close attention to the war, again, because this is a classic battle of democracy versus authoritarianism. And it's clear what side the Ukrainians are on that battle. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.